All right, it's time to dive into the Outer Worlds 2, and big thank you to Microsoft for providing me with a review code. You guys won't get that one until you actually play the game, so I could bring you this roller coaster of a review with no story spoilers, but I will be showing gameplay from the first two playable open regions, so have a seat with Mescalis. Chapter markers below. Let's begin. The Outer Worlds 2 is a single-player, first and third-person semi-open world sci-fi RPG, and yes, it is a sequel to the first game, but it's not a direct sequel, as the game takes place in different colonies with different characters, etc., etc. It is important to note, though, that I did not play the first game, so I do lack that perspective. However, I did hear the word mediocre thrown around more than bras at a Nickelback concert. If there's one thing that bores the crap out of old Wolfheart, it's an abundance of mediocrity.
Never made it as a wise man. I couldn't cut it as a poor man stealing.
With that said, Obsidian advertised that they were coming into this second game with more of a focus on RPG options, deeper player agency, more choice consequence. The list goes on, and this was music to my ears, as systems like these that are at least somewhat well done are what tend to make me personally not think of a game as mediocre. Well, surprise! There's still a ton of mediocrity. However, for myself personally, there were enough interesting systems at play and fun things in this game that occurred to overshadow some of the lower quality stuff, to at the very least make me not regret my experience with this game. So bravo to Obsidian for that, because that's kind of a recommendation in a way. But man, I'd be lying if I didn't tell you that I almost threw this one in the trash faster than Matt Hansen discarding a crusty white dude's portfolio. Come on, it's kind of funny. Lighten up a bit. Let's talk about gameplay loops, so you know what to expect here, and then I'll get into where this game falls short, what it does well, and the in-between. So the Outer Worlds 2 will let you explore 4 distinct, mostly open-world feeling moons, with up to 2 NPC companions with you at a time. The first moon, which opens up after the prologue, I'd say will take most players between 5 to 15 hours to complete, which will then unlock the next moon, followed by the final 2 moons opening up at the same time. So despite each specific location feeling open world, you don't actually have access to all of the moons until, let's say, halfway through the game. As the game progresses, it gradually opens up more and more, really giving you the freedom to choose what you want to do. Main quests, side quests, faction missions, companion quests, exploration, XP farming, or perhaps crafting. And yes, you will sometimes revisit previously visited locations. At a certain point towards the end of the main story, the game signals a point of no return, after which you can complete any remaining optional content at your own pace, but once the game ends, it ends. Overall, I'd say the general formula of the gameplay loop here was pretty good, fairly standard RPG stuff. You'll see some resemblances to like Fallout and the Elder Scrolls, just not quite on their levels of freedom, but ultimately nothing you've not seen before, but hey, no need to fix what's not broken. I've spent a total of around 50 hours or so playing the game, with my first run finishing in about 30. It is important to note though that on that first run, about a third of the way through the game, I just stopped caring about a lot of the side content, as the first playable region really did not leave a great impression on me. With that said, I did end up going back to a load point after finishing the game to then play some of the optional content that I left unfinished to better aid in this review. Ultimately, this makes me believe that most players in a single run will fall into the 20 to, let's say, 60 hour range of playtime, with 35 to 40 hours or so being a reasonable time to expect if you are a player who enjoys doing some side content but is not a completionist. Let's move on to where this game falls short. Now, I'm going to be pretty brutal in this section, so be sure to watch the positive section as well, otherwise your perspective from this review will be extremely one-sided. From my experience, exploration in this game is pretty underwhelming. While the environments do have their beautiful moments from afar, they seem to mostly serve as scenery rather than being meaningful spaces to explore. Most of the moons, aside from one, look pretty exciting on first arrival, and the game does have a few really nice step-out moments that I would say deserve a small golf clap. When I first landed on the opening moon about an hour into the game after the prologue, I did initially get feelings of wanderlust. It was quite nice. In my head, I was getting ready to go find some super cool hidden caves, a ton of secrets, super interesting creatures, maybe gather some interesting plants for crafting. You know, screw quests for the time being. Let's go explore this cool looking alien place and find some cool stuff. Well, only an hour or so into this region, I started to realize this probably isn't the game that's going to satisfy that itch. This was quite disheartening because if a game's first region fails to engage in the exploration category, it sets a pretty poor precedent for the rest of the game and also conditions players to lose interest in exploration altogether, which absolutely happened to me. But jumping into the game itself, I'm in this pretty cool looking area right here, but there's not really hardly anything going on. There's not even any creatures running around. There's no loot. There's no like secret caves. Now there are things you will come across in this game, but expect to be running through a lot of areas that do just look like this, kind of dead. They look kind of good from a distance, but when you get up to them, it's just like, it's boring. There's nothing exciting about this. Unfortunately, this issue seemed to persist throughout most of the game. Even when you do finally stumble upon an off-grid, fairly secret feeling area, the rewards are usually minimal, don't exist, or just flat out disappointing. This had me switching off of my preferred playstyle and more so focusing on quest markers that mostly led me to settlements or large structures. While some of these locations do feature rather strong content at times, the environmental exploration aspect itself unfortunately falls flat, especially for a player like myself who tends to value that element highly in RPGs. Another notable drawback are the NPCs as a whole. Aside from a few main story characters and maybe a handful of other characters being mildly interesting, the overall cast feels bland and generic across the board, whether that be visuals, animations, or dialogue.
Oh, that son of a sprat fucker!
Some of these characters I feel like Obsidian could have pulled straight out of The Sims and you wouldn't even know which ones they are as they would blend right in. Boring, uninteresting, low-budget cosplayers running all over this damn universe. Now, the voice acting doesn't help out much here either. Many characters, especially several of the female ones, sound extremely generic, oftentimes, dare I say, irritating and annoying, and many times nearly identical to one another, just with slightly different pitch variation.
Welcome to Fairfield.
We need the money so we can buy things.
You must be a new... You're back! And in one piece!
Crabbles! Form defensive perimeter type 14A! Ah!
Gee, nice weather we're having today.
Here to do some fishing? Here to do some fishing? Here to do some fishing? Here to do some fishing?
This does happen a decent amount with the male characters as well.
I'll pay my tab in no time. You'll see.
But as a staunch supporter of the matriarchy, I took those crusty white dudes into my own head.
Here I am, your innermost thoughts are known to me, and nobody once hears from you again. To quote, of course.
Standing by.
Now look, I get that the game is going for a specific style and vocal tone, but that's exactly what I'm criticizing here. Instead of coming across as tastefully quirky, it mostly ended up feeling either irritating or just plain old dull. It's not all the NPCs, but it was enough to take note, a fairly big note on my notes here. But let me have the honor of cleansing your palate, and we'll end on a positive, pretty awesome voice. Meet Hogarth.
Our society was built from the bedrock up through the vision of our matriarch. Due to her genius, the structure of our society is perfect, planned down to the last subject.
And this brings us to the companions, who are honestly pretty much just pure NPCs. You don't control them, they don't add much, and their involvement boils down to pressing one button to use their single ability before it goes on cooldown. Jumping into the game, I'm going to use Niall's ability in combat, and you literally just go in combat and you press the button aiming at a place, and that's what he does. That's all you get. Add in an extremely streamlined binary progression system, mostly filled with passive benefits that you won't really even think that much about. Basically zero control over actual gear or loadouts. And yeah, it's a missed opportunity to say the least. I'll give some credit where it's due though, as some of the companion quests were decently fun, taking you to cool places and mixing things up a bit gameplay-wise. But honestly, I didn't really care about any of them. Didn't love them, didn't hate them. They were just there. They all had what I would consider to be rather thin, bland backstories, and compared to many other party-based RPGs, they just don't stack up. And I know they say comparison is the thief of joy, but it definitely rings true here. If you told me that all the companions were going to just die at the end of the game, I don't think I'd bat an eye. Emotional attachment levels were sitting at a solid 20 out of 100. These companions as a whole felt more like background props than meaningful, complex characters that are worth engaging with. I personally didn't feel like there was enough dialogue to flesh them out, and at the game's central hub, which is your ship, you have the opportunity to approach them all the ones you've recruited, but I feel like 80% of the time they really just had nothing new to say. Do not expect Dragon Age Origins or BG3 style campfire vibes going on here. The companions also rarely seem to interact with each other aside from some light banter out in the world, which isn't exactly Lord of the Rings material. But speaking of the ship, that's another letdown. I never once felt excited to return to it, mostly because I knew there would probably be no new companion dialogue, which became a theme it seemed like, and nothing truly meaningful to do there. Aside from using the crafting bench, which is redundant since there's what feels like hundreds scattered already around the game, plus one of your companions is basically a walking crafting bench, the ship offers close to nothing. No customization, no flying. Now, on the back of the ship, the companions do have small rooms with their own special touch when you recruit them, and visiting these rooms may reveal a little extra information on them, but it's not exactly content to start jumping up and down for. The ship is basically just a giant boring loading screen between locations, and this is another huge missed opportunity in my humble opinion. Next up, there's no respec option, aside from right after the prologue. While I will praise some of the progression systems later in this video, this particular design choice was pretty disappointing. The game streamlines so many things, yet suddenly just decides to go full hardcore RPG here. I usually appreciate that kind of design, but in this case, even allowing just 1 or 2 respecs would have greatly improved the experience in my opinion. For example, I invested points into medical solely for the beast taming perks that it unlocks, only to realize that I didn't really enjoy the beast taming system in this game. Well, too bad. I'm stuck with those points into medical, which is a skill that I don't really care for. I only did it for the beast taming, and there's nothing I can do about it. Even if there was just one single respec midway through the game, it would have made a world of a difference. And lastly, let's talk about armor and outfits. Throughout most of the game, I didn't really find that much armor that I was excited about finding, and when I finally did stumble across something that looked good to me, its core stats were often not what I was looking for. The system is overly simplified. You only have a body and a helm slot. I'm no fashion expert, but most pieces tend to look mismatched in my eyes, and many also share identical stats, if not just being a straight up duplicate. Now, you can and you should add mods to your armor, as armor has 2 attachment slots, but it was kind of hard for me to care that much about customizing something that was already feeling dull at its core. As an overall system, the armor felt underwhelming for an RPG and more like something you would find in an action adventure game. Okay, moving on to what I think the game actually does well, and this part is really important because during my first 8 to 10 hours or so, I was close to quitting the game. I said that a couple times earlier in the video, but the positives that I'm about to cover are what kept me going and got me even more interested as the game progressed, and I even started enjoying myself. Despite criticizing the dialogues and characters earlier, I actually found the main story's premise fairly engaging. While the multiple factions vying for control is a familiar concept, the narrative still takes some interesting twists, blending science, math, and religion in ways that kind of blur the lines between them when you don't really know 100% what's going on. And that concept alone was intriguing enough to keep me invested to the very end, which is a win for any story in gaming these days. I also, for the most part, enjoyed the gameplay that came with the main story missions. You get to go to some cool locations and mess with some cool gadgets along the way, and it was pretty enjoyable, more so than side content or exploration. Unfortunately, though, the ending itself did feel quite abrupt, with some predictable choices, and yeah, there's a slideshow finale. Disappointing, as the game actually has some fun, visually stimulating cinematics sprinkled throughout it. And if the ending had more of that energy, I think more players would walk away satisfied. Is it too much to ask Obsidian to do anything other than stagnate these days? Probably so, as the glorified PowerPoint 20-something years later as a studio still thrives. But you know what? We're in the positive section, so let's move on. One of the game's biggest strengths is how its skills and perks play out. Oh, an observation check. Trying to get it to trigger. Where is it? There it is. The RPG systems here are meaningful. Your choices in building a character directly impact what you can do in combat, utility, and even dialogue. I really respect Obsidian for including systems that can lock players out of certain options and even content at times, something that many studios avoid like the plague these days. You gain 2 skill points per level, and how you invest them matters. Max level, I believe, is 30, though I did finish the game at level 25 or 26 on that first run. So for example, focusing on the observation skill will more easily reveal secrets that others will end up missing and not being able to see, while someone else who is more invested in lockpicking may be able to access areas or containers or a vault that you can't access, or you'll have a much harder time figuring out how to access. Each skill offers a passive boost, such as observation giving increased weak spot damage, so it might work well for some sort of sniper sharpshooter build, and engineering giving increased damage resistance. And some of these skills that don't even have utility purposes stated in their descriptions will still surprise you with some utility use, as there are gun checks, for example, that are not combat related. Skills also unlock certain perks, and you get a perk point every 2 levels. I think it's 2, it could be 3. Most of the perks are directly tied to what you decide to specialize in with your skills. For example, put 1 point into hack and you unlock the manual reset perk, and investing a point into this perk will allow you to temporarily disable auto mechs by hacking them. Now max out hack and put 20 points into it, and you'll unlock the powerful plug puller perk, which will permanently disable auto mechs permanently, so no longer temporarily. This creates a fairly satisfying sense of building a truly unique character, which is exactly what many of us want in an RPG. On top of all that, sometimes skills and perks will even unlock certain dialogue options, which was unexpected but a pleasant surprise. Now, during character creation, you will be picking a background for your character and also 1 or more traits. I went with the Renegade background, and I did see plenty of Renegade-specific, mostly optional dialogue, which was a nice RP touch. As for traits, you can choose just 1 and avoid taking a negative trait, but all the traits, whether positive or negative, come with passive benefits, and they influence both dialogue options and world skill checks, which I think is great. The game also features a rather clever flaws system, where flaws, which are kind of similar to perks or traits, will appear based on your repeated actions, depending on what you do as a player, and you can choose to accept or decline these flaws. For example, if you don't use vendors that much, eventually the hermit flaw will pop up on your screen, and if you accept it, you'll get a 25% chance to double your crafting materials when you break things down, but vendor prices are going to jump up 50%. Another flaw, called reckless leadership, appears if your companions are frequently downed, and if you accept this flaw, it will prevent companion revives in combat, but when a companion goes down, you now get a boost to your other companion's health and energy. I encountered, I'd say, 8 to 12, maybe even more flaws during my initial run, and although I declined most of them because of their severe downsides, the system was enjoyable to see and contemplate on, and it definitely added another layer of character customization in terms of builds. Another strong point of the game is its handling of player choice and consequence. While I'd need hundreds of hours to test out every possible outcome here, revisiting a few key points showed me that choices do tend to genuinely matter. While there is a faction reputation system that's influenced by smaller actions such as completing faction quests or committing crimes, there's also some really big decisions to be made that can just straight up turn an entire faction hostile to you, which alters not only available content, but also general gameplay, as certain regions will now just attack you on sight. You can also approach faction situations a bit more diplomatically and assume a mediator role at one point in the game, and the choice is yours. I also greatly appreciated having the freedom and agency to just start shooting if I wanted to. I know that kind of sounds psychotic, as the game has systems that do respond to such actions. You can even attempt to kill some of the higher ups in a few of the factions, and some of these characters are directly connected to the main story, or shall I say, were directly connected. This extends to companions as well, as killing a companion's allies, if they're part of a faction or whatever, can lead to them permanently leaving your party. Many quests in this game also give you a lot of freedom in how you choose to approach them. You can go in guns blazing, you can sneak through a lot of quests with stealth, or try diplomacy. For example, let's say that there's a guarded bridge that you need to cross. Well, you can just kill everyone on the bridge. That is almost always an option. Or you can try sneaking past everyone if you have the skill. Maybe you have really good speech skills and you can use some sort of charisma or some sort of dialogue line that the NPC will just let you cross. Or perhaps an NPC on the bridge will offer you a quest to gain their favor and then help you out. And that's actually a real in-game example. Now, many quests and even some of the main ones also offer completely different optional paths to solve a problem, with each path offering unique content, which adds significant replayability, but more importantly, the in-game in-moment feeling like you're in charge of what you want to do. And lastly, in this category, some of the guns in the game were genuinely fun to use, though the selection didn't really shine until later on, at least on my run. By mid to late game, I had weapons like chain lightning guns that would stun enemies. I had a satisfying sniper that had a silencer attachment, and a really gratifying shotgun. There's also some cool melee weapons as well. While I did find myself wishing for more variety earlier on in the game, the later options were fairly enjoyable, and this is something that I did note down. The ability to modify weapons with mods such as scopes did add some level of customization, though it is fairly simplified. I would have personally loved more attachment options. If they did something like Call of Duty has or something like that, that would have been so cool for a game like this. But now let's move into the good enough, I guess, category. That's what I'm going to call it. So combat. It works. It's serviceable. I did enjoy using a few of the guns, later on in the game, like I said, but overall the combat is pretty standard fare here. Average to stupid AI, predictable boss fights, nothing really groundbreaking going on. But with that said, it's fine for an RPG, because this is a genre where combat doesn't always have to be the primary focus. It was good enough, I guess. Side content is also just okay, in my opinion, sometimes leaning more towards the negative side. You won't catch me doing collectible quests in this game, but they do exist for those of you that like that type of content. Faction quests do have their moments. Standard side quests are hit or miss, I would say, but they did miss many times in my eyes. There's also smaller side content like bounties for players that are looking to perhaps max character progression or hopefully find some new interesting loot, even though that's kind of underwhelming in the game. The variety is good when it comes to quests, but the quality is a mixed bag. Crafting in this game was fine. It was functional. You gather junk and use recipes to make weapon attachments, armor attachments, grenades, ammo, inhalers, which is a medical thing, and miscellaneous like lockpick type items. I often crafted ammo, and I did keep an eye on some of the weapon mods, so I did engage with the crafting system, but it also just wasn't something that was notably fun. Do not expect professions or crafting options such as tanning, cooking, or alchemy. I do wish that they had a bit more in this category, like more professions, for example, could have made exploration a lot more meaningful if they placed things out there for those professions. I also find myself thinking back to some FPS competitive games that have gun attachment systems where you can do like 5, 6, 7 attachments on a single gun. That would have been super cool for a game like this, an FPS RPG, to have that level of customization. The third person perspective is certainly janky, but my expectations were not that high to begin with, as it's a feature that was not even planned to be in the game initially. Some of you might look at this as a pure negative, but I just thought it was okay. It was fine. It did its job when I wanted to switch to it. It kind of reminds me of the Elder Scrolls third person. It's awkward at times, occasionally fun, and especially useful for stealth. Good is not a word I would use to describe it, but I'm happy that they did include it. And lastly, character creation, speaking on appearance here, pretty mediocre. It's good enough, I guess. Neither bad nor impressive. I think most of you will be able to at least make something in the realm of what you are okay with, but don't expect deep customization like moving scars or intricate facial details. All right, a quick section on performance and bugs, and then on to the conclusion. I have a 4080 GPU, Ryzen 9 7900X PCU, and 64 gigabytes of RAM. I played this game on 1440p resolution. mostly on the high or very high settings, and I would get anywhere from 70 to 110 FPS, with about 90 or so being average. It did kind of change a bit in that range. When I turned ray tracing on, it did noticeably make things look better, and I wanted to have it on, but unfortunately things started getting quite choppy when I had ray tracing on, with frames dropping into the 40s, which forced me to turn on frame generation if I wanted to keep using ray tracing, and frame generation was a bit of a mixed bag. Sometimes it worked all right, sometimes it felt a little off. That's just how it goes. Overall though, performance was fine for my PC. There was only a few stutters, and I might have crashed maybe one time the entire time I was playing. I do worry a little bit though about less powerful PCs and maybe consoles, but we'll see. Bugs in this game were fewer than I expected, given its many systems and permutations, and also being on a review code. But here are a few of the ones that I encountered, just to give you a heads up of the possibility. So my first companion, outside of the two that you pretty much start off with, disappeared after saying that she would meet me at a location, which eventually led to her off-screen death that I wasn't even aware of initially, leaving her unavailable for that entire run. Audio occasionally felt off in this game with inconsistent volume levels, which I think will be fixed, but there was also some spatial awareness, noises and sounds and issues that I don't necessarily think will be fixed, at least not fast, or possibly not at all. One of my companions had a speech bubble above his head pretty much the entire game when he didn't have anything to say. I was once teleported behind a vendor's desk and I couldn't escape without reloading. Load points on elevators were a big no-go while playing, and I also jumped down a cliff one time, which completely glitched my companions out because I didn't know what to do or how to get down. There were also some NPCs that were walking in weird directions and stuff like that, but honestly nothing too bad in that regard. Despite these issues, the game remained playable for me, and most of these bugs I do think Obsidian is aware of, so there is a chance that they may all be fixed before launch. So we finally made it to the conclusion. I don't typically assign number ratings to games that I review, but as you saw in the thumbnail, if you were to hold a gun to my head, I'd probably give this one a 3.5 out of 5 stars, which for myself is pushing the limits of what I am personally willing to spend my time playing. But hey, it did make the cut. My initial impressions outside of the prologue were really not great, but as I kept progressing, some of the game's systems started to blossom and show their worth, which ultimately was enough to keep me invested to see the game through to the end. Now, there's several notable negatives that I discussed that really weighed down the experience, such as exploration being quite dull and deceptively boring and unrewarding. Dialogue, NPCs, and characters as a whole, including companions and their progression systems, felt mostly subpar, uninspired, or generic, if you will. But then some of the notable positives were powerful enough to pull the scale back up a bit, such as the RPG systems at play that allow for meaningful, unique character progression, real choice consequence being present, and a healthy amount of player agency in how one chooses to tackle a quest or a situation. So all in all, I give a droopy, unconfident thumbs up here, a half recommendation, if you will. I do absolutely think that some of you RPG fans will enjoy this one, but I also don't think that it will be that controversial to say that the game's overall package isn't high enough quality to warrant a $70 purchase if you don't have Game Pass. I expect a mixed bag of opinions on this one, so be sure to watch some other reviews. Thank you all so much for watching.
Never made it as a wise man. I couldn't cut it as a poor man stealing.